Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Attacks on shipping in the Gulf are escalating as the war between Iran, the United States and Israel continues. The International Energy Agency says it will release 400 million barrels of oil from its emergency reserves. And Spain has formally withdrawn its ambassador to Israel amid rising diplomatic tensions. Oil tankers have been targeted and commercial vessels fired upon as tensions escalate across the Middle East. The attacks have unsettled global energy markets, sending oil prices sharply higher amid fears that the conflict could disrupt supplies.
Attacks on shipping in the Gulf are intensifying as the conflict between Iran, Israel and the United States spreads across the region. 2 fuel tankers were set ablaze in Iraqi waters after explosive-laden boats attacked them late Wednesday. Authorities said the vessels, the Marshall Islands-flagged Safe Sea Vishnu and the Malta-flagged Zephyros, were struck in a ship-to-ship transfer area, leaving 1 crew member dead. In a separate incident, at least 3 ships were hit in and around the Strait of Hormuz, including the Thai-flagged Mayuri Nari, one of the world's most critical routes for oil and liquefied natural gas shipments. Iran claimed responsibility for that attack, saying the vessel had ignored warnings while passing through the strategic oil corridor. US President Donald Trump said American forces had destroyed 28 Iranian mine-laying ships during the conflict and signaled Washington was closely watching developments in the strait.
And now we're going to look very strongly at the straits. The straits are in great shape. We've knocked out all of their boats. They have some missiles, but not very many. I think we're in very good shape. The main thing is we have to win this. They win it quickly, but win it. And there are many people, I'm just watching some of the news. Most people say it's already been won. It's just a question of when. When do we stop?
The United Nations Security Council has passed a resolution demanding Iran halt attacks on Gulf states, warning they breach international law and threaten international peace and security. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said Tehran would continue its attacks on US and Israeli targets until it believes the threat against Iran has ended. He also said Iran remains committed to regional peace, but insists the war can only end if what he described as the country's legitimate rights are recognized and guarantees are provided to prevent future aggression. Meanwhile, Israeli strikes have intensified in Lebanon as the conflict spreads further across the region. Explosions rocked Beirut's southern suburbs during a new wave of air raids. Lebanon's health ministry says at least 8 people were killed in a strike on Beirut's Ramlet al-Baida seafront, while another attack in eastern Lebanon left 8 dead and 17 injured. Israeli operations in Lebanon have killed more than 600 people and displaced around 800,000 residents, according to Lebanese authorities.
US President Donald Trump says Iran's missile stockpile is dwindling and the US has largely won the conflict, though operations continue. Our Washington correspondent Ubay Shabanda sent us this report.
They've got no Navy, they've got no Air Force, no systems of control. Those were President Trump's words as he spoke with reporters on late Wednesday, saying that Iran's missile stockpile is dwindling significantly. Trump added that the war has been, for the most part, won from his perspective, but that operations will continue for the time being. The commanding general of U.S. Central Command, Admiral Cooper, has signaled that the U.S. military remains concerned that Iran is using civilian ports in the Strait of Hormuz to conduct military operations that threaten vital international shipping routes. Multiple ships in the Arabian Gulf carrying crude oil have been struck by Iran in the past week. The U.S. military, in return, has destroyed at least 16 mine-laying naval vessels belonging to Iran. If the Straits of Hormuz are mined by Iranian forces, it could prove to be a long and complicated process to remove those mines. And that's an outcome that would negatively impact the global energy trade. To calm market jitters and ease fuel prices as the conflict continues to impact global energy flows, President Trump has authorized the release of 400 million barrels of oil and petroleum products from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserves. Iranian missiles continue to target oil refineries and crude oil storage facilities in the region. Those attacks have been widely condemned by America's Arab allies, who have turned to Ukraine in recent days to supply them with their anti-drone technology in order to shoot down Iran's Shahed kamikaze drones more effectively. The United Nations Security Council on Wednesday decisively adopted a Bahrain-led resolution condemning Iran's regional attacks. I'm Ube Shabander, A News, Washington.
Northern Israel remains under pressure as tensions continue along the border with Lebanon. Our correspondent reports from Metula and Haifa, where residents are living under the threat of missiles, drones and ongoing cross-border fire as the conflict with Hezbollah intensifies.
We are in Metula, is considered the most dangerous border in the Middle East. This town is surrounded on three sides by Lebanon, which it means is surrounded on three sides by Hezbollah. Here, the artillery sounds constantly. Also alerts because of incoming missiles and drones, sometimes up to 27 times in a single night. A lot of people left, although it seems like a ghost town. Some residents remain here. Even the current situation is a surprise, but we found Bella Cafe is open. Here is Or. She works here. How come? How can you have this place open?
So I can tell that I saw from the first day that everything started here, that it's so important that we be here from our community, for the people who stay here in Metula. It's so make us strong that we are together.
So as a former ambassador here in Israel, how do you see the situation now, if made some difference between previously situations or conflicts?
It's an interesting question. It's not so simple. Okay? That on one hand, it's very clear now that Iran is using Hezbollah as an ancillary in this war. Okay? It's basically a division of labor. Okay? Iran's going to fire a certain number of missiles at us, but they'd rather fire more missiles at oil-producing countries, and they'd rather fire more missiles at American military installations, because that's the way you get pressure on the Trump administration to stop the war. And it's very effective, you must admit. It's given an order to Hezbollah to open fire. The Lebanese are not happy about it. They're very angry, and they'd like them to stop. And the Lebanese government has actually offered to enter into peace negotiations with Israel. And Israel's response to that is, okay, but first try to fulfill your promises to stop and disarm Hezbollah. It's very difficult for the Lebanese. Hezbollah is very, very powerful.
If we drive 1 hour from Metula to the south, lies Haifa. It's the third largest city here in Israel and the most important port. Was also hit very hard by missiles and drones.
Hopefully this conflict ends. It actually it hurts a little of my rights as a citizen. Like, I have a right to go to my job, I have a right for studies, to go to the library, and right now even travel rights are being touched.
The north of Israel is the hottest point of this conflict. The double threat endangers not only the population, but also the country's economy.
In an effort to reduce soaring energy prices, the International Energy Agency says its 32 member countries will release 400 million barrels of oil from its emergency reserves. The United States will contribute 172 million barrels, with deliveries expected to start next week.
The International Energy Agency says its 32 member countries have agreed to release 400 million barrels of oil from emergency reserves to help ease soaring energy prices triggered by the war involving the United States, Israel and Iran.
Our countries will be making 400 million barrels of oil available. I repeat, 400 million barrels of oil available to the market to offset the supply lost through the effective closure of the strait.
The US will contribute 172 million barrels from its Strategic Petroleum Reserve, with deliveries expected to begin next week and continue for about 120 days, according to the US Department of Energy. US Energy Secretary Christopher Wright said the move is aimed at stabilizing global markets after oil prices surged following the start of military strikes on Iran on February 28th. President Donald Trump said the reserve would later be replenished, with plans to add around 200 million barrels within the next year. Despite the announcement, oil prices remained high. US benchmark West Texas Intermediate crude was trading at around $92 per barrel, reflecting concerns that the conflict could continue. A key factor behind the surge is disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, a crucial shipping route that normally carries about 20% of the world's oil supply. Tanker traffic has largely halted amid security fears after reports that several ships were struck by projectiles. The disruption has pushed US crude prices up more than 30% since the conflict began, while gasoline prices have also risen sharply.
Spain has formally withdrawn its ambassador to Israel amid rising diplomatic tensions. The move follows disputes over Spain's criticism of Israeli military actions in Gaza and recent US-Israeli strikes on Iran. Tel Aviv's embassy will now be led by a charge d'affaires, a temporary diplomat until further notice.
The Spanish government has officially dismissed its ambassador to Israel, Ana Maria Salomón Pérez, who was recalled 6 months ago due to the war in Gaza, will remain out of her post until further notice. The embassy in Tel Aviv is currently being run by a chargé d'affaires. Tensions between Spain and Israel have escalated again following recent US and Israeli military actions against Iran. The decision was made by Foreign Minister José Manuel Álvarez and approved by King Felipe VI. Relations have been strained since October 2023. Attacks that month, along with Israeli military operations in Gaza, Lebanon and Iran, created a diplomatic standoff. The Spanish government criticised the operations as acts of genocide. Israel withdrew its ambassador from Madrid in 2024 after Spain recognised the state of Palestine. Last September, Ambassador Pérez was recalled amid Spain's measures banning aircraft and ships carrying weapons to Israel from entering Spanish ports and airspace. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar described the move as anti-Semitic.
Buenas noches. Nos estamos precipitando de manera muy peligrosa.
Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has criticized the US and Israeli strikes on Iran as violations of international law. He also highlighted the issue during local election campaigns. Israel, in turn, accused Madrid of standing with tyrants. Sánchez has also angered US President Donald Trump over his opposition to the war, with Trump threatening to cut all trade with Spain. Spain's withdrawal of its ambassador marks a new phase in the long-standing strained relations between the two countries.
The UN Security Council on Wednesday failed to pass a Russian-drafted resolution calling for an immediate halt to fighting in the Middle East. The vote was 4 in favour, 2 against and 9 abstentions. Russia's ambassador accused opposing countries of ignoring peace and called the outcome a disgrace. US Ambassador Mike Waltz said Russia was protecting Iran and vowed to continue holding Tehran accountable for destabilizing actions.
Those against?
EU ambassadors have approved a new round of sanctions targeting Iranian officials and entities over alleged human rights violations, as divisions within Europe deepen over the broader Middle East conflict.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, as EU member states' ambassadors approve new sanctions targeting 19 Iranian officials and entities over what the bloc calls serious human rights violations. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas posted on X that, quote, the EU continues to hold Iran accountable and that as the Iran war continues, the EU will protect its interests and pursue those responsible for domestic repression. The measures still require formal approval by EU member states, but underline the bloc's effort to pressure Tehran politically while conflict escalates in the region. At the same time, divisions inside Europe over the broader Middle East crisis are becoming more visible. Spain permanently withdrew its ambassador to Israel, downgrading diplomatic representation to a charge d'affaires as relations between the two countries deteriorate. The move follows months of tensions over Spain's opposition to Israeli military operations in Gaza and its criticism of U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran. Israel had earlier recalled its own ambassador after Madrid recognized a Palestinian state, deepening the diplomatic rift. And in Rome, the Italian Prime Minister also delivered her sharpest criticism yet of the conflict. Giorgia Meloni warned that the U.S.-Israeli military campaign against Iran reflects a broader and, quote, dangerous pattern of unilateral interventions outside the scope of international law. Speaking in Parliament, Meloni said such actions risk undermining global stability, even as she reiterated that Iran must never be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. Italy is, meanwhile, deploying air defense assets to Gulf partners amid fears of further escalation. Taken together, these developments highlight the increasingly complex European response to the widening Middle East conflict, balancing pressure on Iran, diplomatic fractures with Israel, and growing concern over the international consequences of the war. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Russia has accused Britain of involvement in a Ukrainian missile strike on its Bryansk region as new cross-border attacks were reported in both Russia and Ukraine.
Russian authorities say a Ukrainian missile strike on the Bryansk region late on Tuesday killed 6 civilians and injured 42 others. The attack caused widespread damage, with buildings burned and roads and vehicles destroyed. The Kremlin accused Britain of involvement in the strike, saying the missiles could not have been launched without the assistance of British specialists. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Kyiv had struck one of the most important military factories in Bryansk that produced electronics for Russian missiles. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials say Russian forces dropped explosives from a drone onto a public minibus in the southern city of Kherson, injuring 20 passengers. In the country's second-largest city, Kharkiv, a drone strike hit a meat processing plant. Authorities say the attack killed 2 workers and injured 4 others, with 2 of the injured women in critical condition.
After the break, we turn to the latest developments in the war involving Iran as military operations continue and political questions grow about how long the conflict could last and what its ultimate objectives might be. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. The conflict involving Iran continues to evolve with ongoing military operations and growing debate over its strategic objectives. Questions are now being raised about the coordination between Israel and the United States, the future of Iran's leadership, and whether the conflict is moving toward a political resolution or a prolonged confrontation. Let's bring in our guest now. Political analyst Tom Gross joins us live from Tel Aviv. Tom, welcome to the program.
Hi, good to be with you.
Now, before we examine the political questions, could you give us a sense of the current situation on the battlefield, what Iran, Israel and the US are doing militarily right now? And have we seen any significant changes in the intensity or strategy of military operations in recent days?
Obviously, this is a situation that's evolving very fast. Let me just give you a couple of examples. When the new supreme leader was appointed about 4 days ago, one of the only leaders in the world to congratulate him was the Sultan of Oman. And Iran repaid this by bombing Oman yesterday in a particularly big explosion you may have seen off the coast there. The fire is still raging. And this is being seen in Israel and elsewhere as another example that appeasing the Iranian regime doesn't work, as we see now with Oman, one of its allies. Israel has suffered another barrage of missile attacks overnight, both from Iran and Hezbollah, its proxy militia in Lebanon. It was a coordinated attack. However, the amount of rockets falling is less than it was a week ago and much less than in the conflict last June, and even fewer vis-a-vis Hezbollah than in the Gaza war, when there were hundreds of missiles a day in barrages from Hezbollah. Now there are about 100 a day, which is still a lot, but it's less, and therefore Israeli missile defense systems are able to deal with them better. Israel and the United States continue bombing strategic targets in Iran. And one other important new development overnight is that for the first time, Israel has hit the besieged militia. In other words, it's not only going for senior regime targets like the leadership or the infrastructure, it's going against the militia who terrorize the population and control the streets. And this is the thing that the Iranian regime is most worried about. They're not so worried, according to my sources in Iran, from planes from the air and bombing military installations which they can rebuild, or bombing missile launchers which they can rebuild. What they're worried about is losing control of the streets through their kind of militia, the besieged, that keeps under gunpoint the population and control. And what Israel did last night is it used some drones to attack besieged at the various checkpoints they set up. They set up checkpoints to control the Iranian population. Once the besieged have been attacked and are more frightened, then the Iranian people can come back onto the streets in protest. So this is a very important development overnight.
And from what we know so far, how effective have the strikes been in targeting Iran's missile infrastructure and military capabilities? Are we seeing the conflict shift from airstrikes into maritime confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz now?
Well, firstly, they've been very effective, the airstrikes of the United States and Israel. They have, as I mentioned, destroyed large amounts of their ballistic missile launching capabilities and other bomb-making equipment, both maritime and aerial. Having said that, Iran is a big country, the big military, and therefore it is still hitting strategic and economic targets in the Gulf, and it's hitting civilians in Israeli cities like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. But it is greatly weakened. About 90% of the missile launchers have been destroyed, according to the Pentagon and according to Israel. Regarding your second question, I wouldn't say the conflict's shifting from the air to the sea. It's going on simultaneously, both an aerial conflict and maritime conflict.
Okay. Now, another front here, Tom. Could Hezbollah's deeper involvement open a second major front for Israel?
Well, it's not opening a second front. The Hezbollah, as I just said, have been bombing Israel pretty much since about the second day of this war, on, I have to say, on instruction from their paymasters in Tehran. Hezbollah are not an independent entity. They are like a subsidiary of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. They are financed by them, armed by them, and they take instruction from them. So the Hezbollah front is just another front of the Iranian regime front. And yes, Israel is dealing with them. It's hitting back against Hezbollah targets in Lebanon quite strongly. Israel is hitting back. And I have to say, another thing that's interesting, spoke to a Lebanese friend earlier this morning, and he pointed out that the Lebanese government are very happy Israel is doing this against Hezbollah, because Lebanon cannot move forward as a nation when it still has this militia that takes instructions and money from Iran and is stopping Lebanon moving forward as a country. And the Lebanese government are not powerful enough to take on the Hezbollah militia within Lebanon, and therefore quietly the Lebanese government are cheering on Israel for taking on Hezbollah, because no other force will do so, and Lebanon will maintain a kind of broken country as long as Hezbollah are such a powerful force within it. So yes, there's a second front, but it's not a new front. It's something that's been there for a while. And unlike under the Biden administration, where the United States contained Israel, this time the Trump administration and Sunni Arab states are encouraging Israel to go after Hezbollah infrastructure and weapons.
Okay, and Israel and the United States began this campaign in close coordination, as we know. Are we still seeing the same level of strategic alignment between the two countries?
I think so, yes. Look, you have people who are kind of defeatists in the media, especially in Europe, in the United States, in Britain, where I grew up, who are incredibly defeatist and trying to say that America and Israel are not on the same page. In fact, I've really been racking my brains and spoke to a couple of historians. We can't think of a single example in history where two militaries and two political leaderships were so closely aligned as the United States and Israel are now. They are flying together. It's a true partnership. It's not one partner more than the other. Both pilots are taking part in these operations. There is total cooperation at a political level and the senior military level. In fact, I'd say that one of the reasons there is so much kind of sour grapes almost among some commentators in, for example, Britain, is that the US is showing that its closest partner is not a member of NATO, is not a country like the United Kingdom with its so-called special relationship with America. Its closest partner is Israel, and that's because it's a true partnership, because the Israeli military can offer the American military more than militaries that have been run down, like some of the NATO militaries. They've been run down over the past years. So, look, there is a second level of people saying that Trump and Netanyahu are not on the same page. We've heard this story before. I don't know how many articles I've read or analysis I've heard on various other networks, not your own, claiming that the United States and Israel are moving apart, at least as far as the Trump administration is concerned. Of course, there are sometimes differences, as there are within the Israeli government itself or within the United States administration itself. But overall, there's incredibly close coordination. And I think that sort of journalists who don't quite know what's going on because they haven't got the right sources and are trying to stir things up are wrong to suggest otherwise.
Okay, so as far as the European perspective then, Tom, how has the EU responded diplomatically to the conflict so far? Because there appeared to be some form of sitting on the fence earlier in the piece. How are they responding so far, and could it play a role in future negotiations? We know a new round of sanctions on Iranian officials have been approved by the EU ambassadors just recently.
So I think Europe is years, if not decades, behind what they need to be doing. Even contained in your question, the idea of a new round of sanctions, I think we are beyond that at this point. No one in the Middle East, no one I know in Iran, no one in the Sunni Arab world, no one in Israel, and people in much of the rest of the world want this regime to survive. And with all due respect to the EU, sanctions aren't enough. So to answer your broader first question, the EU is not participating very much. Britain, for example, supposedly a close ally, is only now moving a warship into the region in the second week of the war. France has sent a couple of ships, but in a kind of performative way. And as was the case with Ukraine, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Europe has been taken by surprise. It's scrambling to get an answer in what to do with Iran. And I think, again, there's a kind of denial or kind of willful denial among many Europeans, thinking this isn't a conflict that affects them. It doesn't just affect them economically. Islamic radical expansionism, which really dates back in the modern era to the 1979 takeover of Iran, and then the counter-reaction in the Sunni world to say that we need to be radical too if the Shia Iranians are being radical. That Islamic radicalism has in some ways undermined countries, especially in Western Europe, in all kinds of ways. And were the regime to change in Iran, I think that's the beginning of the pushback worldwide against extremist Islamism, which will also liberate the vast majority of Muslims throughout the world from the extremists from which they themselves are the main victims. So I think Europe really, I don't want to sound too overwhelming, but so many commentators, they don't have a clue as to what this war means, how important it is, and what their reaction should be. And, as usual, EU diplomats are pushing papers around and holding emergency calls, but not doing anything concretely.
Okay, Tom, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Thank you for your analysis.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Stay with us. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Azerbaijan is once again hosting the Global Baku Forum. The three-day event organised by the Nizami Ganjavi International Centre gathered dignitaries, policymakers and civil society representatives from all over the world to talk on the pressing global issues.
Gulistan Palace in Azerbaijan's capital hosted the opening ceremony for the 13th Global Baku Forum. The venue was packed with current and former heads of state and government, policymakers and representatives of institutions, companies and civil society from all over the world. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev opened the forum with a speech focused on security challenges, regional connectivity and the peace process with Armenia. Aliyev said that after peace with Armenia, work is underway to expand the Middle Corridor to pass through that country as well. The route would also link Azerbaijan with its Nakhchivan exclave. The organizers are saying that the forum comes at a time when the world is no longer unipolar, but it is not meaningfully multipolar either, and that it's trapped in what they called an in-between phase. They're saying that great power rivalry is the driver of today's international affairs, and that global systems that are in place to reduce geopolitical friction and prevent escalation are weakening. Over 3 days, all the panels, sessions, and sideline events will provide an opportunity to examine the effects of this transition on a wide range of topics, including economy, tech, energy, and supply chains.
Inside the 13th Global Baku Forum, world leaders, policymakers and experts are exchanging views on the major challenges shaping today's rapidly changing world. Our correspondent Aytan Shukurova has more.
United Nations is weakening.
At a time of growing geopolitical tension and rapid global change, leaders and policymakers have already gathered in Baku for the 13th Global Baku Forum. Organized by the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, this year's forum is held under the theme Bridging Divides in a World in Transition. The three-day event is designed as a high-level platform for dialogue on the major challenges shaping the international system. Discussions span a wide range of issues from global security and the future of multilateral institutions to climate action, digital governance and sustainable development.
The forum, I think, is a very important platform for dialogue, to build understanding and to seek solutions at a time when they are urgently required. We have seen what is happening in the region, in this region, and its impact, its wider impact on the entire global community in terms of the risks to inflation, growth, jobs, stability, and of course, sustainable peace.
There are people who are not living in good housing, so also the question of slums and better housing in the future is there, but particularly how can we help poor people? Think of Gaza. In Gaza, people are still in a very, very bad condition. So we will touch upon all of that. And at the end, we do hope to feed that also into the institutions, into the UN, into the World Health Organization, and so on.
Participants are also examining the future of United Nations, China's role in global governance initiatives, regional connectivity, Africa's development outlook, artificial intelligence, next-generation health systems, and youth engagement in global policymaking. Urban resilience and housing linked to the upcoming World Urban Forum 13 in Baku are also part of the agenda. Further session updates and speaker announcements are expected as the forum continues. Ayten Şükürova, İlkin Mehdiyev, A News.
UNESCO says several historic sites in Iran, including Tehran's Golestan Palace, have been damaged in the conflict, warning that cultural landmarks across the region could also be at risk.
At UNESCO headquarters in Paris, concern is growing over the impact of the conflict on cultural heritage in Iran and across the Middle East. The UN's cultural agency says several historic landmarks have already suffered damage as hostilities continue. Among them is Tehran's Golestan Palace, a 19th century royal complex known for its ornate halls and mirrored interiors. Images from inside the palace show shattered glass and damaged woodwork following recent strikes. Iran is home to 29 World Heritage Sites, UNESCO says, some of which have been caught up in the fighting.
UNESCO is deeply concerned by the first impact that the hostilities are already having in many World Heritage Sites. For instance, in Iran, where already 4 World Heritage Sites have suffered from the consequence of the hostilities.
UNESCO says it has shared the geographical coordinates of key cultural landmarks with all parties involved in the conflict in an effort to prevent further damage. The agency says protecting heritage sites is essential for preserving the shared history of the region.
We learn that heritage protection is key, not only for the protection of the historical reference of all the people, but also because when time comes for peace, heritage contributes to favor reconciliation and the recovery of the people from the traumatism.
UNESCO says it will continue monitoring the situation and is urging all sides to safeguard cultural landmarks as the conflict continues.
At Astara, hundreds of foreign nationals and diplomats are entering Azerbaijan through a key corridor. On the line from the border, we have our correspondent, Rukaya Bashamak.
Reporting from the Astara border crossing between Azerbaijan and Iran, where evacuation efforts continue as foreign nationals leave Iran in the midst of rising tensions. Authorities say several people have been arriving in throughout the day, passing through document checks and security procedures, some of whom are Azerbaijani and non-Azerbaijani citizens. More recently, among the people evacuated are citizens of Azerbaijan, China, Indonesia, Pakistan, Australia, and Nigeria, including several diplomats and ambassadors from different nationalities. Diplomats from the embassies of the Netherlands and Algeria in Iran were also evacuated. According to authorities, 4 staff members from the Dutch embassy, including the ambassador, as well as 9 staff members from the Algerian embassy, arrived in Azerbaijan. The Swiss ambassador to Iran, along with a 6-member delegation from the embassy, were also evacuated. As of now, according to official figures, since February 28th, more than 2,000 citizens from at least 72 countries have been evacuated from Iran via this very checkpoint. Among there are at least 300 Azerbaijani citizens. The Astara Road has become an important evacuation corridor, and Azerbaijan plays a key role in facilitating humanitarian evacuations and providing a safe transit route for foreign nationals to leave the region. This is Ruqayya Bashamakh, News.
Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan said on Thursday that Armenia is actively working toward establishing lasting peace with Azerbaijan, even before a final agreement is formally signed. He warned that some forces oppose reconciliation, but said efforts are underway to make peace lasting. Here's what he told reporters.
It is very important to note that this is the first time, or if it is not the first time, that a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan has been signed, and that peace has been established in the conditions where the agreement has not yet been signed. We're now talking about establishing peace and surrounding peace with it. In this sense, the internal political processes should be implemented both in Armenia and Azerbaijan, because there are forces in Armenia and there are forces in Azerbaijan as well. To be honest, I am not familiar with many of the internal political parties in Azerbaijan who do not support peace so much and should try to surround peace. We, the citizens of the Republic of Armenia, should establish the established peace and surround it with peace.
France is urging Europe to reduce its dependence on Russian uranium and look for alternative suppliers. One of the key partners could be Kazakhstan, the world's largest producer of the strategic metal. Our correspondent reports from Almaty.
France is looking for alternatives to Russian uranium, and Kazakhstan could become one of the key partners. That's according to French President Emmanuel Macron, who spoke at the International Nuclear Energy Summit in Paris. Macron said that Russia accounts for about 40% of global uranium production, warning that such dependence creates geopolitical risks for Europe. He called on European countries to diversify supplies and expand cooperation with other producers, including Kazakhstan, as well as Canada, Australia, Mongolia, and the United States. Kazakhstan has held the position of the world's largest uranium producer for several years. In 2025, the country produced around 25.8 thousand tons of uranium. Almost all of it is exported, as the metal is barely used domestically. Kazakhstan alone accounts for more than 40% of global uranium production and holds roughly 15% of the world's known reserves. France is already one of the largest buyers of Kazakh uranium. Interest in expanding supplies increased after the 2023 coup in Niger, when the French company Orano lost access to uranium from that country. Since then, Paris has increasingly been looking at Kazakhstan as a stable and reliable source of the metal. At the same time, Kazakhstan's national uranium company Kazatomprom continues to expand long-term export deals. The company recently submitted a major supply agreement with the Indian government for shareholder approval. The contract is valued at more than half of the company's total assets. And earlier, it also signed the long-term uranium supply deal with China's state-owned China National Nuclear Corporation. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A-News.
After the break, we turn to developments in the South Caucasus, where Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has addressed the European Parliament, highlighting early results of the Washington Agreement with Azerbaijan and Armenia's ambitions for closer ties with the European Union. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has addressed the European Parliament for the second time in 2 years, outlining Armenia's foreign policy priorities and its ambitions for deeper engagement with the European Union. In his remarks, Pashinyan highlighted the early results of the Washington Agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which aims to advance peace and cooperation after years of conflict. Let's bring in our guest, Hussein Sultanlı, advisor at the Center of Analysis of International Relations from Baku, Azerbaijan. Hussein, welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Now, in his speech at the European Parliament, Prime Minister Pashinyan described the peace agreement with Azerbaijan as a historic turning point for the South Caucasus. From your perspective, how transformative is this agreement going to be for the region?
Definitely it's going to be primarily because for several decades the South Caucasus was a region of conflict, of isolation, following the occupation of Azerbaijani territories. So the Washington agreements are unique. First of all, they represent a great opportunity for Azerbaijan and Armenia to work bilaterally. And, ever since the agreements were signed, we have seen several, tangible steps already being taken. And this is only, bound to continue in the future. But also on a regional level, I think, we will talk about this later, but the Washington agreements present several different actors, such as the European Union, to engage more closely with the South Caucasus and leave their contribution to the process of turning the region from one of confrontation to stability and prosperity. So I think the Washington agreements have everything to be transformative, to lead to a permanent transition, and the steps that have been taken since are already indicative of that.
Okay, so the Washington Agreement created a framework for peace, but implementation is always the difficult part. And you did say that we've already started to see some tangible results, but what concrete steps still need to happen for the agreement to become a lasting settlement?
Well, I think, there are sort of different things that different parties can do to contribute to ensuring that these agreements are implemented. On Armenia's behalf, of course, we know the importance of ensuring that its constitution does not contain any to that will be essential to ensure that the peace that we are observing right now, the steps that we're seeing are actually long-lasting. So I think the local actors, primarily Armenia, of course, has to play its part. But I think the role of external actors is just as important. And the fact that the United States is engaging with the region, the fact that the United States is playing a key role in advancing the Trump route for international peace and prosperity will ensure that all these processes have the necessary momentum, because with any peace, with any regional peace, especially going on in the South, a momentum is essential. And I think that momentum has to be provided by both local actors and also external ones. So I think the combination of those two will ensure that anything that remains ongoing becomes definitive in the medium term.
So staying on external actors, Hussein, what role could the European Union realistically play in supporting stability and cooperation in the region? And could stronger EU involvement help reinforce the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan?
Definitely the EU has a role to play. The EU has a unique opportunity at the moment to redefine its approach to the region. Unfortunately, although the EU has cooperation with both countries, in previous years we did see an approach that wasn't necessarily contributing meaningfully, contributing positively to reality on the ground. Its relationship with Armenia and its relationship with Azerbaijan is different, and unfortunately, for several, on several different occasions, it was disproportionately leaning towards Armenia. We can see that both in assistance, but also we can see that in the way that the occupation of Azerbaijani territories was approached politically. So the EU definitely has a role to play, and in recent months, we have been seeing several steps that indicate a desire, a willingness to acknowledge, previous mistakes and take new steps, which will contribute to a region that is, different to previous eras. So here, I think the EU has already announced several initiatives. One of those is the cross-regional connectivity agenda, which aims to unify its approach to the Black Sea, South Caucasus, and Central Asian regions. We're also seeing the EU step up its direct engagement with Azerbaijan, and that is very important because Azerbaijan has proven to be a very reliable partner for the European markets, especially the energy markets. So I think the EU needs to rectify its tendency to, perhaps over-politicize the region and side with one country and prioritize economic cooperation, because I think that economic interdependence, building economic interdependence, is the best way to ensure that the South Caucasus becomes a region of peace. And the EU, with its capabilities, both its financial capabilities, but also its experience in transport and logistics, definitely has an opportunity to contribute to that.
Okay, so one of the key elements of the agreement is the new transport corridor linking Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan through Armenia. How important could this project be for regional connectivity and economic cooperation, and could economic connectivity become the strongest incentive for maintaining peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan?
Definitely, I think that economic interdependence is definitely a step in the right direction. It will help the countries resume sort of regular bilateral interaction. We have already seen this, but I think as I mentioned earlier, with any region that is highly sensitive, momentum and consistency is the key. And I think the more economically interdependent the two countries become, the greater the chance for lasting peace and stability. And the route that you mentioned, the Trump trip, is fundamental here, because it will basically ensure, it gives the countries essentially a platform through which they can work together, listen to each other and engage in dialogue. And moreover, trip stands out obviously because of the leading role that the United States, the Trump administration has played, and the United States acting as a guarantor will only strengthen ongoing local initiatives between the two countries, which are aplenty. Starting from the transportation of fuel, for example, and ending with political dialogue at the expert level. So I think economic interdependence, which is facilitated by external engagement, will definitely lead to greater peace, greater stability between the two countries.
Okay, we've run out of time for the hour, Hussein. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
You're up to date with world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.